Hello there, all you pop pickers and funky groovers. It's time for this week's Top 10 Countdown. And at number 10, we've got Fleetwood Mac with Brit Awards Boogie. At number 9 is the Red Sofas with Good Technology. At number 8 is the Shameless Plugs singing Get It Here. At number 7, Star Trekking with Star Trekking. Number 6, Right Said Fred, I'm Too Sexy. At number 5, Give Pizza a Chance and the Pepperoni Song. Number 4, it's Kraftwerk with How Am I Gonna Program This? At number 3, it's the Capaldi Pose and Dream Boy's Dream. Number 2, it's Celebrity Mates with Cartmel's Book. And at number 1, for the 10th week running, it's Round the Archives with Another Episode in the Can Part 2. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 52 of
Round the Archives.
We are the people's favourite. We are the people's choice. Ba 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 ba. Oh. Grr. Yes, thank you to Martin for that lovely top 10 countdown intro.
Yes,
we did put it up on our YouTube site, but we thought it was about time that it got used, considering what we're going to cover later on.
Yes.
But here's Martin again now to look at
Spies and The Sandbaggers.
Sandbaggers and Other Spies. This article has been sitting in the Around the Archives files for over 2 years. It has now been released so that you can hear it. The world is now ready to hear me talk about the Sandbaggers. So anyway, HMG slapped a D notice on the whole thing, and here we are. Every podcast has its Secret Service branch. RTA also has its own. A messy job? Well, that's when they usually call on me, or someone like me. Oh yes, my name is Holmes. Martin Holmes. I seem to have been watching rather a lot of spy fiction lately. I don't know why, really. Maybe it's the nature of the world in general. Maybe all the old sitcoms aren't quite managing to make me crack a smile. Maybe it's the fact that we watched all of the original Mission Impossible TV series a couple of years ago. Or maybe it's just because when it comes to selling the concept of watching archive telly at home, the series that seem to have turned out easiest to get the rest of the household watching happen to be from the ITC stable. And that's chock full of super-secret agents, espionage, and international playboys fighting the forces of evil and diabolically fiendishly plotting plotters. You want more information? 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 You won't get it! Actually, by listening on, you will. We no longer live in a black and white world. That's a statement that's particularly true to viewers of archive television. Once colour television came along, somehow things were never quite the same again. Not as gritty, not as grainy, not as grey. It's also very true of spy fiction. A splash of colour, a hint of glamour, and suddenly the life of a spy started to look rather more appealing to the uninitiated. All cocktail parties, expensive habits, and scantily clad lovelies with perfectly toned bodies flinging themselves at our heroes as they tried to solve the, usually Western, world's problems. Of course, nowadays we all live in a world made up of various shades of grey, several of which don't even involve consenting adults spanking each other in the privacy of their own chambers of love. Back in the 1950s and 60s, in the era of the Cold War, the world was so much more simple, and yet so much more complicated too, and the spies that turned up on the telly and the movies had a far more easily identifiable enemies of freedom to combat. The bad guys were the bad guys, and our heroes defeated them on a weekly basis, and that was pretty much that. The Cold War was very cold indeed, and there were a heck of a lot of spies out there in the cold, making cold decisions coldly. The Bond films had been an enormous success in cinemas in the early 1960s, and because success breeds success and the Cold War was still at its most chilling, television producers thought that they fancied some of that, and spy series upon spy series started popping up, waving around a gadget or two, and then disappearing forever inside a diplomatic bag or 12. And yet, even before little Jimmy Bond had strapped on his shoulder holster and practiced his first merry quip in front of the bathroom mirror in the boudoir of some underdressed femme fatale, John Drake had been fighting for the free world for a year and a half in the very first series of Dangerman. Sometimes I like to pronounce it Dangerman, but that's mostly because I am extremely silly. Oh yes, I am silly. Extremely silly. In 39 swiftly told and surprisingly slick adventures, all first broadcast between 1960 and 1962, Patrick McGoohan was announced every week by being given an introducing credit, despite the fact he'd been around the houses in British films for quite a few years already, and surely by the time the series finished, pretty much everyone presumably knew who he was. Oh yes, my name is McGoohan, Patrick McGoohan. In this first series, Drake is an Irish-American US agent. In the later, hour-long version of the show, resurrected a couple of years later, he would become far more resolutely British, although even during these early shows, the almost apologetic, "Oh, someone like me," and that, "Oh yes, my name is," does seem terribly polite and perhaps lacks the brashness of the true American spy. The half-hour episodes really don't hang about, rattling along at a fair old lick, despite a pre-credit sequence, and the plot usually ends with a swift exit, never outstaying its welcome or hanging around too far after the plot has been resolved. And these are not simplistic plots either. Some rather hefty and sadly still rather relevant topics, such as people smuggling and the like, are dealt with here in a world where nobody can really be trusted and double-dealing do-badders are behind every plastic pillar or hotel room doorway. And then there's the elephant in the room of knowing that one day, before too many more years had passed, Patrick McGoohan would introduce us to The Prisoner, in all its vibrant bonkers and short-lived glory. Knowing about the fact that The Prisoner is coming, it's amazing to spot the fragments of what would one day make up key elements in that later series. So many of the actors, the strange statues on pillars dotted about, so many rooms, and the style of music must have all struck a chord with the creative side of the McGoohan mind, and that "be seeing you" catchphrase gets used a lot. What's more vague at times is the blackness or whiteness of some of the Western actors playing, oh dear, ethnic characters, but given the times they were made in and the vintage nature of the material, perhaps we should gloss over that for the time being and maybe return to it another day. Colour TV brought a strange lack of grittiness to the spy genre. A couple of years ago I rattled my way through the entire black and white first series of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. with no problems at all, but the second series, now shot in glorious and garish colour, has been much more of a trudge, and a long time on I've still not managed to get more than about 10 episodes in. Maybe I've got too many other distractions in the archives. Colour also seemed to put paid to the gritty espionage tales told aboard Seaview in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, because that first year, a bit like the first year of Lost in Space from the same stable, does seem more realistic than the subsequent years when the full-colour crazy bonkers 60s flooded in. I blame Batman, but then, don't we all? Over on the seamier side of the Atlantic, Callan always somehow seemed more real, somehow in the monochrome years, as Edward Woodward fell over the furniture and brought down several hunters and intellectuals in those dark, dangerous, dirty post-war, post-wall, Cold War years. And then, once the spoofs began, Napoleon Solo started boogieing his way past the forces of Thrush with the occasional chimp in tow. Meanwhile, Jimmy the Bond had a face change after hanging round in the volcano and avoiding Dean Martin going in like Flint. On this side of the Atlantic, international spies became team efforts, usually working out of Geneva, and once Callan packed it in after a particularly bad day, the spy drama, like many other genres, faded away into the background for a while. And then, whilst we were waiting for George Smiley to come along and renew interest in this darkest of worlds, in 1978, from the pen of Ian McIntosh, up popped Yorkshire Television's The Sandbaggers, which would hang around for 3 series before being quietly bumped off when its author disappeared in mysterious circumstances after writing just over half of what became its final season. If action and shooting and glamorous fast living is what you're after, then The Silly Buggers, as my father probably never called it, is possibly not for you. This is the men in suits talking in Whitehall offices brand of spy drama, and yet, if you check behind the picture frames for hidden microphones and sit down on your sofa to watch the first episode of The Sandbaggers, an episode called First Principles, it's all rather strangely compelling. After the YTV logo fades, a rather sombre but also catchy theme tune covers a montage of briefcases, people walking, dial telephones, and the general paraphernalia of what we imagine covert office life as a spy in the late 1970s might involve unfolding, whilst a typewriter script spells out the name of the series in vibrant red and the cast names appear in plain white text, ending with a terse "and Richard Vernon," which, as ever, promises much. Much of the series' location budget is immediately spent as we follow a man in a smart three-piece suit around a travelogue of various parts of London, watching as he stops to give quizzical looks from time to time and pausing to look at reflections in shop windows before descending into an underground station. This, we will discover, is Neil Burnside, Director of Operations of the SIS, and already we know that he is not to be messed with. Eventually we see him looking thoroughly pissed off as he enters a nondescript building in Whitehall, after which the camera pans up to a high window in what is obviously meant to be an anonymous office building. Roy Marsden plays the no-nonsense DOPS of SIS, Neil Burnside, in a selection of immaculate suits and a rather intimidating buzz cut and sideburns combination, and, as he enters his office, brushing past Diane, his very efficient secretary, he's immediately in charge, bellowing that as yet unexplained moniker, DOPS, into a telephone at the very first available opportunity. Burnside is narked because he's realised that he's being followed in what he assumes is a random check. And he's even more narked, get used to this, Burnside is narked for a lot of the time, to discover that a man introduced only as Willie, who will turn out to be Sandbagger 1 Willie Kane, as played with plenty of easy charm by Ray Lonnan, is also being followed, which, it transpires, is something that simply will not do, at least not without his permission. Willie is sent out for a walk, and the person following him is then followed by Jake Landy, Sandbagger 2, who is a character you won't want to get too attached to. This is already tricky, complicated stuff, so you have to watch closely if you want to keep up. It eventually turns out that all this following the followers and being followed leads all the way back to the Norwegian embassy and a thickly bespectacled Olaf Puli playing Torvik, the head of the virtually non-existent Norwegian Secret Service, who is not averse to a little grumpy and devious plotting of his own. He's terribly jealous of the UK Special Section, a section which we've just learned is far better at following people than his own lot are, and wants to make a special section of his own. This naturally gets him into an awful lot of trouble with Burnside, who doesn't like being buggered about with, although their tetchy interview does serve the purposes of the plot in that it mentions Willie Kane, and the concept of the three-man Sandbaggers section is sort of explained more fully for the first time for the viewers at home, anyone who hasn't read this week's Radio Times, or anyone who might just be wondering what a Sandbagger might actually be. In a wordy script that you really have to listen to in order to keep up with. It turns out that SIS is a chess piece in some sort of covert wheeling and dealing, and that dear slimy old Jerome Willis is playing Matthew Peel, the deputy chief and Burnside's pain in the backside of an immediate superior. He's telling him that deals have already been done without Burnside being involved. Back in the SIS offices, we discover that Sandbagger 3 is in Hong Kong, so we're not going to meet him this week, and whatever shenanigans are afoot, it's going to involve Sandbaggers 1 and 2 having to deal with it. After all, in this powder keg of political intrigue, it would be impolite of SIS to refuse, even if it means getting their best operatives killed, although, with all of that chatter going on, I am sometimes reminded of those Hello Control sketches that Fry and Laurie used to do. Anyway, Olaf kicks off again, announcing that something bad has happened, involving a crashed plane, some scientists, and an infringement of Russian airspace. In the good old days, it was always the Russians. You kinda knew where you were when it was the Russians. Anyway, the Russians are looking for the downed plane, and because his own agents are so rubbish, Olaf wants Burnside's SIS to deal with the problem. Burnside, obviously, because it's a daft and dangerous thing to do, does not want to. Torvik also requests that Kane, Burnside's top agent, is the one that should go. In fact, he's so insistent about this that you might think that he's done a deal, so that the Russians capture Kane, the utter bar steward. Well, it's either that, or he just wants to nobble SIS so his own clown school doesn't look quite so bad. Seasoned spy thrillers watchers are by now definitely aware that he's up to something, But in this world of double, triple and quadruple crosses, we're still not certain exactly what it is that he's plotting. Gripping stuff. It's nice as a viewer not to quite have all the cards on the table from time to time. Burnside wants to know what he will get in return for all these risks, and for the moment, duplicitous old Olaf is frustrated, and this sense of frustration will cause far more trouble for Burnside later on in the episode. Burnside returns to see the deputy chief, and they have a discussion in one of those drab green offices that feature so prominently in such series, with their walls heavy with paintings by old masters, which presumably belong to the taxpayer. Sir Geoffrey has been on the phone, and the fact that his own superior is also Burnside's ex-father-in-law makes the deputy chief terribly unhappy. It's no picnic for Burnside either, however, as he does seem to have several ex-wife issues to contend with. The ever-reliable Alan McNaughton, as Sir Geoffrey Wellingham, shares an interesting scene with Burnside when they play a cat-and-mouse game between powerful boss and resentful underling, but also as ex-father and son-in-law, and the power playing between the two is happening on so many levels that it's thoroughly gripping. Does Burnside have any message for his ex-wife Belinda? He does not. Several issues seem to be coming to the boil here. Belinda has found some of Burnside's notebooks in the old homestead and wonders if he wants them. He doesn't, which appears to be a game Sir Geoffrey is playing to test some murky waters. He's also rather disappointed to find out that Burnside already knows what's going on with the Norwegian situation and has already dismissed it, which is a pity, seeing as the powers that be have already approved the mission. And we head into the first commercial break with Burnside thoroughly vexed that the rescue op is most definitely on. It perhaps might seem strange to modern audiences brought up on the hypertense beats of more recent dramas that an ad break might fall in the middle of a scene, but as I mentioned, this is a wordy script, and the dramatic beats fall as and where they will. After a good couple of minutes pondering upon which coffee, toilet roll or chocolate bar to buy, as we left Burnside to stew in his raging juices, we return to debate the pros and cons of this decidedly dodgy-looking deal. This, we imagine, is the sort of thing that was always going on off-screen once Callan had raged at Hunter's latest set of orders. Hunter would go off into other drab offices and get various strips torn off him. And so it goes, and so it all goes. And so this particular meeting continues, with Burnside concerned about his sandbaggers being stretched too thinly and unavailable for other dodgier work, and wondering why his covert ops facility is being used here simply because Norway doesn't have one of its own. Perhaps they should call on John Drake, or someone like him. Anyway, Burnside points out quite shrewdly that this is not a risk for Norway, and that the British don't get anything in return for taking such huge risks. Sir Geoffrey says quite nonchalantly, "Who says we get nothing in return?" And so we come to the real crux of what's going on. The British are building a Nemesis missile, and the Norwegians have promised to buy British rather than buying the new American War Bonnet missile. It must have taken days to come up with suitably plausible names for these missiles that sounded just as convincingly ridiculous as the ones we are actually using in the real world of building stupid weaponry. And so it all comes down to worries about jobs in the aerospace industry, and the lives of a few spies and the unsettling of the relative calmness in East-West relations means nothing when put up against such a political argument. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Anyway, finally Burnside is given a no-options directive from the brand new C, as played by Richard Vernon, who fills us in on the small detail that Burnside is a brand new D-Ops and ought not to be rocking the boat, biting the hand, and so on and so forth. There are, after all, simply the instruments of government. And so, despite the fact that there is absolutely no incidental music, things start to get busy in the corridors of power. Various men in suits have various meetings, we get to see Olaf planning and plotting some more, and Willie tries his level best to remain avuncular. Jeff Ross, Burnside's opposite number in the CIA's London office, played by one of those ubiquitous American actors based in London, Bob Sherman, makes his first appearance, although he is unable to provide any assistance as he has a job on in Malta. Considering where the series is ultimately heading, references to Malta this early in the game are very interesting indeed. And so the British are now committed to the mission, and the RAF at Wokingham are sending up a spotter aircraft. And there's a lot of unhappy discussion about whether the RAF ought to be involved in this at all, although Burnside wants to buy British and insists upon the RAF dropping the spies in anyway because, being British, there's less chance of a foul ahem. This, of course, means that nobody's happy, and just in case you forget it's all set in Britain, footage of the street outside shows us that there's a great big red bus. Klaxon! Going past as normal life beyond these corridors of power carries on unawares whilst Yes Minister with Spies is being played out behind closed doors. We then meet some rather nice RAF chaps chatting about whatever cover story they've come up with, and, via some Jaguar aeroplane stock footage, we cut to a crash plane on the ground, and we finally get to see the Norwegians that all this fuss is about, waving, presumably grateful at being found by the forces of the West, and unaware of all the nonsense that's been going on. Their fate is still uncertain, however, and they might yet fall between the cracks, between the various factions fighting their not-so-good fights in dark rooms far away. Olaf, it seems, is still very unhappy, despite all the efforts being made on his behalf, the old misery. His chief upset seems to be the tardiness of the whole process, as if he should just clap his hands and the entire British Secret Service would leap into immediate Bond-like action with their miniature laser beam watches strapped on and ready to go. There's a little bit of discussion about proposed escape routes for getting the heck out of there, and whilst Olaf continues to sulk in a wild Norwegian way, Burnside points out in a terribly calm British manner, because we're still in that era of that particular stereotype having a certain amount of weight, that they are going as fast as they can, which Olaf grumpily points out is not fast enough. Burnside's list of meetings is very full this morning. A meeting in the park tells him that there isn't a hope in hell of success, and a meeting with C has him pointing out that they are being made to feel like lepers. After all these meetings, we are taken inside the ops room, which is a chaotic maelstrom of typewriters, telex machines, wall maps, and astonishing moustaches. Despite the fact that, hidden behind his heart of stone, Burnside is always looking out for the men under his command, Willie gets a little bit too flippant and is told off in no uncertain terms by Burnside during the briefing, and, because of the office rule of always kicking downwards, Sandbagger 1 looks as if he's in really big trouble as we head into the second commercial break. After the break, everyone we see appears to be smoking, and, in response to Burnside's rather pointed and terse "well," in demand of an explanation from Willie, they are all worrying about mission twitch, which is obviously a Sandbagger problem, of which at this stage in the story, they now have several. After all, 3/4 of the story is now told, and nobody's left London yet. Well, nobody except Olaf. It turns out that Torvik has been sent back to Norway, having got his way, presumably, job done. Mission preparation carries on, and we discover that Burnside's secretary, Diane Lawler, looks after them all like a surrogate mother, being the one who cuts the council the milk and so on, whenever they head out on missions. On location, in an RAF hangar somewhere, our two sandbaggers are suffering from pre-mission, pre-flight sickness, and the sandbagger hierarchy is further established. Their worries are increased by the fact that they learn that no diversion tactic has been approved, and our heroes, not unreasonably, admit to a certain amount of fear. We see them much as we see Tommies going into battle in those 1950s war films, complaining, stalling, and with their plane still on the ground, boarding. Back in London, Diane dashes in announcing that Torvik has cancelled the op because he's already sent the Americans in. This news, of course, all comes far too late, and Torvik's not unexpected double-cross finds Burnside furiously asking whether they can abort the mission, just as Ross arrives imploring them to do the same. Meanwhile, unaware of all these developments, the two sandbaggers make their parachute jump from above a wild and windy Yorkshire moor. Probably. Of course, we all know it's Yorkshire, and that's part of the problem. After all, for at least 2 decades, televiewers have been made well aware that Eastern Europe and beyond looked not unlike rural Buckinghamshire. This more unfamiliar version of the Cold War backdrop suddenly seems far too gritty. Later on in the series, a park in Leeds would double for several of the Berlin-y bits of Eastern Europe. Late 70s Britain, especially in the north, looked like that in a lot of places, although sometimes, perhaps, not so much. So, unhappily, it was too late to abort the mission, and the forces of plot irony would seem to indicate that our plucky heroes are about to die for no good reason at all. There's another round of bitter chatter about missiles and protocols before we cut back to Ray Lonnan, on location, watching the plane and wearing the sort of woolly hat that confirms that we are most definitely not in James Bond glamour territory. We viewers now know that the plane has been mined with explosives, but we don't know whether the sandbaggers know this, and to a music-free soundtrack of bleak wind noise, Willie notices that something is wrong. Sandbagger 2 volunteers to go and have a look, and the two sandbaggers have a little matey old chat about the wisdom of that, which means that the plane blows up without them. In London, we discover that the CIA have been conned because Torvik panicked, and a whole round of political arse-covering begins, especially with regard to protecting the Prime Minister's reputation, which, for these instruments of government, is of course what it's really all about after all, same as it ever was. Back on location, the sandbaggers are working their way around the perimeter of a quarry and crossing the North Yorks moors in an effort to catch up with the fleeing Americans and Norwegians. They make their way across country and are catching up when the Russian soldiers appear and capture the lot. From a safe distance, observing all this, Willie announces with bitter irony that the US team did them a big favour by saving them from a similar fate. In a park near the US Embassy, Ross and Burnside have a little of their chats, which grease the wheels of progress, and we find out that the war bonnet missile is an utter fiasco anyway, and, as to his own situation, Burnside says that he'll know tomorrow forenoon, which seems an odd way of putting it. Maybe it's spy speak. Back in the vicinity of the Russian/Norwegian/North Yorkshire border, in those pre-electronics, pre-sat-nav days, an exhausted sandbagger 1 is in woodland checking his maps. Which leads to a rather lovely moment when our trusty sandbaggers 1 and 2, after having escaped the Soviet troops, Willie informs Jake that he has got bad news for him, that by his reckoning they're already 7 miles inside the Norwegian border, and therefore, at least for an episode or two, they are both safe. Happily for us, but not perhaps for the depressing forces of irony, although maybe episode 1 is not the place for quite such bleakness. Well, not until Spooks comes along a couple of decades later. Both sandbaggers have got out undetected. Hurrah for the Brits! Yabu sucks to the Yanks! There's another round of bitterly ironic missile chat with Sir Geoffrey, and Burnside is invited to dinner, but announces that he has to go to Oslo, which, being a hop and a skip from Leeds Airport, means visiting an actual airport location. YTV never likes spending money, but a return flight to Oslo for a small crew and no overnight hotel expenses was probably cheap enough to give an authentic international flavour. Perhaps someone ought to try setting a drama on a North Sea ferry. No, perhaps not. At the airport, Torvik is roundly told off by Burnside, and we get a kind of mission statement for the entire series. Think, then think again. Most of the planning is done in those drab, dreary corridors in Westminster, and, because he is an ex-sandbagger himself, Burnside is darkly threatening, and we believe him when he announces that if he had a glass in his hand, he'd ram it down Torvik's throat. There was another, later spy drama, much like this, called Cover, that hardly anyone seems to remember these days, other than the fact that Sandra Dickinson was in it, not using her ditzy American voice for possibly the first time. I only mention it myself because I remember that one of the spies was called William Wigglesworth, and that seemed a rather wonderful conceit for a spy series, when they otherwise always seem to have such gruff, terse spy names. Meanwhile, the Sandbaggers became very much the prototype for several other spy shows in later years, and some people still consider it to be one of the very best ever made. And who am I to argue with that? Anyway, I have to go now. I think I can see a sinister hearse pulling up at the curbside. Be seeing you.
Many thanks to Martin for that.
Thank you, Martin.
That article's been hanging around in my files for ages.
I know, yes.
I'm dreadful sometimes at hanging on to things, but I think it was the right time to use it.
It is.
And now, you and me will take a look at...
the Kit Curran Radio Show.
Now here's a man whose assets only need a little thawing to have him out of the big freeze of the backwoods and into the big time. Kit Curran.
I am the people's favorite. I am the people's choice. I'm the voice that everybody out there hears. I'm riding on the airwaves. Never gonna be the same. 'Cause I am the leading contender for radio fame. I'm so fantastic, here on the radio. I'm so fantastic, king of the stereo sounds on the radio.
This is the Kit Curran Show here on wonderful Radio Newtown, and the next caller on the line is Marie. Hello, Marie.
Hello, Kit. I'm ringing about, hanging. I mean, it's a proven fact that if you hang somebody, then statistically speaking, he's far less likely to do it again.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Andrew.
So, the Kit Curran Radio Show
Yes.
we have done recently.
We have watched, yes.
All 6 episodes.
Yes.
There is a second series
Yes.
just called Kit Curran, and we'll briefly mention that, but we're concentrating on the first season here, aren't we?
Yes.
Do you have any memories of it?
I think I do, because when we put the DVD in and then the title sequence popped up, I immediately remembered the music.
Yeah.
It's a very memorable theme tune.
because it's Ultra Fantastico, composed by Dave Mackay, lyrics by Ian Lafrene, and sung by Dennis Lawson.
It is. Yeah.
And released as a single.
Yes. Didn't chart though.
I was going to say, you didn't have the single,
No.
did you?
No, did not have the single.
But yeah, I remember watching it, and I was amazed that it was as short run as it was, because it's one of those things in my head. It was around for a while, but there aren't really many sort of shows based around a radio station, are there? Obviously, you've got Shoestring, and I was reminded of WKRP in Cincinnati, which you've never really heard of, have you?
Any of that, so
I wonder if that was an influence on doing a comedy set in a radio station. I don't know. I just went through the end credits for WKRP and was pleased to see an associate producer called Max Tash.
Okay.
And I just imagined he looked like Jimmy Edwards, but that's probably not true. But yeah, the Kit Curran Radio Show has got a really good cast, hasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, Dennis Lawson had not long done Star Wars.
No, but sort of 6 years earlier, really.
Yeah. But what do you think he's most famous for at this point?
I don't know, because he's in Local Hero, which I think is around this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's one of those faces, I think, that just sort of pops up on the television, and you know him in stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, Local Hero is 1983. Yeah.
Yes, that's the year before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a fairly sort of big name. I do like his costumes, don't you? They're very 1980s.
Oh, they're very mid-80s, very bright and leery, and yeah.
A lot of them sort of, I was looking at them and I thought, those would be better Doctor costumes for Colin Baker than what he was saddled with. Because they are quite, as you say, they're leery, but they've got a certain style to them, haven't they? There's sort of little jackets and things like that with lots of colours.
Yes.
But you've got Clive Merrison as the newsreader, Damien Appleby, who really hates everything, doesn't he?
And I think when I saw him a few years later in Paradise Towers, Doctor Who, that's what I would have known him for.
Yeah.
Because he's also in around this time, maybe a few years later, A Pocket Full of Rye.
All right.
The Miss Marple.
Oh yes, okay.
Where he's got less hair, so I think he's got a wig in the first series.
Oh right, okay.
Because he's got less hair in the second series.
I do like when he's reading the news. He does little mimes of things, like to do Prince Charles. He pulls the the headphones out, the little round bits on the side of his ears. And yes, you've got Paul Brook.
Yes.
Who I always remember as that bloke with the eye.
Yes.
Yeah. As Les. And Paul Brook's one of those people that pops up in a lot of things as well.
Yeah.
But the whole sort of setup is that sort of, Kit's the sort of, is he the star disc jockey, I guess?
He possibly is. Yeah.
Although he does have more programmes on than you perhaps realise, because he also adopts the persona of Wild Man and does another show after his show and somehow gets away with it.
Well, he gets away with it because the controller of the radio station at that point is a drunk.
Yes.
Played by John Horsley.
So, yeah, John Horsley's the controller at the start. But the whole point about episode 1 is that a new controller's coming in who's Brian Wilde. Sort of fresh from Last of the Summer Wine.
Yes.
And I really think it's a real sort of classic trapped situation. You talk about sitcoms, people being in situations they don't really want to be or having to fight against something.
Yes.
And in many ways, if you compare this series to the second series, which basically they've all been sort of sacked from the radio station.
Well, the radio station
is closed down.
It's closed down, yes.
It is almost like sort of comparing Porridge to Going Straight.
Yes.
In that you miss that structure. And as you said, sort of watching the second series, in the first series you're very much on Kit's side.
Yes.
Fighting against the system. In the second series he's a lot less likeable.
He is.
Because he sort of exploits everybody.
Yes. And he exploits everybody in the first series.
But you don't mind it so much.
But you don't mind it so much, no.
Other notable names include Derek Goodwin.
Yes.
As producer.
Producer-director.
And Nick Curran as floor manager.
Yes.
And, Kit Curran, Nick Curran, you've got to have a system. But, of course, Nick Curran, director of Day of the Doctor.
Yes.
And other things like that. You've got a few other sort of decent guest stars as well, because you've got Barbara Lott turning up.
Yes.
And Angus Mackay as well, haven't you? Joseph Marcel is the security guard. Constantine,
I think. Yeah.
Weirdly, he does get referred to as a Dalek at one point. And considering this is a few years before his appearance in Remembrance of the Daleks, I think that's quite spooky. But this is another series in which Doctor Who is a fictional show on the telly.
Yeah.
And I always like sort of, Dalek references in shows like that, because of course we've said about Mind Your Language.
Yes.
And Even Only Fools and Horses.
Yeah.
So it's set in Newtown. Now, when you say Newtown, I immediately think of Z Cars.
Yes.
But you said it's sort of implied to be put more London, isn't it? 'Cause
yeah.
Where did you say it was filmed?
Well, according to Wikipedia, so this is of course could be wrong. It was filmed in Bracknell.
Yeah. But there are sort of references to sort of London, so maybe it's a sort of London area. But it's what, Newtown East and Newtown West, according to the MPs.
Well, there are two different districts, yes, because there's you get the MP for Newtown East in the in one episode, and then later in the series you get a by-election story because the MP for Newtown West has died.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a district. It's obviously quite a big area, so it's split into two. Because you do get that. You get like different MPs for different parts of sort of the same town. So,
but let's just go through the episodes. So the first episode is 2nd of April, 1984. I'm going to get the insert from the from the DVD cover. I'll flap it at you. There you go. So, end of an era. Kit's reign is threatened by the unexpected arrival of a new boss, and that is quite fun in that they tried to convince Brian Wilde that the station's an absolute sort of tip.
Yes.
And that everybody is sort of drunken or drug addicts or everything.
I've got a problem of some kind.
I've got problems because he's come from the BBC and had a bit of a nervous breakdown, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few nice sort of BBC references.
Yes.
Both to the BBC itself and to some of its stars of the time. None of them very complimentary, as to be said. But yeah, they almost get away with it as well, don't they?
Yeah, there's a lot of physical comedy in that episode. I'd not realised how good Dennis Lawson is at physical comedy.
He's very bendy, isn't he?
He is. He does a lot of sort of throwing himself about, and some of it's not terribly PC in the light of today's world, but it is quite funny. But
you really like the bit where he's sort of sat on the desk at one point, and he sort of flips himself over. This is in a later episode. And sort of scuttles off like a crab, you said, just to escape.
Yes.
Because there's one we saw in the second season where he falls out of a window or something like that.
Yeah, he sort of throws himself, jumps out the window. Yeah, he's
But we rewatched it with Warren, and the final scene is in the pub where they're sort of celebrating having sort of tricked Brian Wilde, and the set is rather well designed, and there's a bit of wall, isn't there? It's sort of internal wall, and Warren was going, he's behind the wall listening, isn't he? And of course he is. But we should say also about Les always eating. Yes. Because he's always got a big long sort of baguette or something in his hand.
Or a sort of big roll of some kind.
Yeah. I mean, Bob Fisher, weirdly a sort of disc jockey, and Tim Worthington will be interested to know that he's reading Rude Food at one point, and that got mentioned in Looks Unfamiliar recently. I mean, talking about local radio, have you had much experience of what was your local radio station?
I don't know. It would we didn't have, as far as I know, we didn't have a local radio. So it probably would have been sort of one of the London ones, sort of Capital or that sort of thing.
Well, we had 2CR FM, and Warren will know and remember that. That started up in sort of late 1980, and I think it was quite exciting that we had a local radio station. And in fact, I went on it.
All right. Okay.
There was a sort of kids sort of magazine program in sort of the afternoon, and I think I might have mentioned this before, but in our sort of science class, we made some out of old sort of radiators and tubing. We made sort of what we called solar panels. So you'd put them out in the sun, you'd pass water through them, and the sun would heat up the water, so sort of water went in at 20 degrees and came out about sort of 28.
Okay.
So we'd extracted energy sort of from them, and so that was us. And then another group had sort of experimented with dissolving teeth in various liquids, sort of sulfuric acid and sort of Fanta and things like that.
Right.
And so we somehow our sort of teacher got us onto 2CR FM.
Mm-hmm.
I remember him saying something like, "Oh, Andrew, you should come because you won't be stuck for words," or something like that, implying that I was nattering, which is not true. I'd probably be a lot more nervous about it now, but I remember I can't remember who the sort of presenter was, but they said we'd invented some solar systems. And being a bit of an astronomy geek, I had to say, no, actually they're solar panels, not solar systems, because you wouldn't be able to fit the solar system into the studio, would you? And considering I was about 12, I thought that was wonderfully sarcastic. Yeah, I think the group that said about dissolving teeth, I don't think Fanta would like what they said about Fanta versus sulfuric acid, but hey-ho. Anyway, so the new broom is episode 2, and have we said his name? Roland.
Yes, Roland Simpson.
Boss, is sort of getting rid of the dead wood, isn't he? And basically he's going to sack everybody, including Kit. And how does Kit manage to sort of get round this?
He makes out that he's some sort of big community sort of charity.
Yeah, helping people.
Yeah. So he
invents this kid, doesn't he? He's got some disease or something.
Yeah. He sort of guilts him into it, really, doesn't he?
And then he gets this actress in, dressed as a nun.
Yes.
To appeal. Mm-hmm. I think, is this the first episode where we get all the stuff with the drinks machine as well?
I think it is.
Yeah, because Clive Merrison's always in this battle with his drinks machine. It's always eating his money, isn't it? Yeah, so that one's quite fun. Mm-hmm. Bread and circuses, they're worried about their viewing figures, aren't they? They've had a survey done, and most people have never even heard of Radio Newtown.
Yeah.
So they try doing some sort of OB stuff, don't they? And having a chat show, and none of it ends well, does it?
No, though they do get. It's only that when Kit starts to come up with some ideas, and none of them are particularly salubrious ideas. They're all a little bit dodgy, but he drives the figures up.
That's the thing. He sort of goes for low standards. And doesn't he have sort of bingo and things like that? And, and people start listening. But it all gets a bit. Doesn't they get a complaint from the IBA or something like that? Yeah. Is that where Roland end up in hospital or something? Yeah. P is for positive. Kit discovers that life can be awkward when people start thinking positive. So he holds this sort of class, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. It's sort of cross between sort of aerobics and sort of psychology, isn't it? Because later in the second season, he does sort of go into alternative medicine and stuff like that. But yeah, Constantine, who'd been previously very laid back, suddenly starts laying down the law, doesn't he? Yeah. And they managed to regress Clive Merrison to why he's so annoyed with everybody. It's sort of a traumatic childhood,
and
isn't
he suddenly becomes nice for a short while.
No, it doesn't last long.
No.
Yeah. Election fever. A by-election means media coverage, cameras, and publicity. So he goes to see all the candidates, doesn't he? And sort of. Because the Conservative candidate doesn't really want to get involved. He's got a huge picture of Margaret Thatcher up as well, hasn't he?
Yes.
But eventually, sort of he gets in, despite sort of Kit not having treated him very well. But Kit sort of says it was all a test, and he sort of passed with flying colours.
Yeah.
And then the big break is. Kit goes to have an interview at the BBC, doesn't he? Which is where you've got Barbara Lott.
Yes.
Because you've got Barbara Lott.
Angus Mackay.
Who's the other one?
Ian Thompson
from the Web Planet. He doesn't sort of jump up and down.
No, and be a Menoptera.
An opera. Yeah, he's not big enough to be a Menoptera. Menoptera. But yeah, that you've got this one other candidate, and sort of Kit sort of undermines him, doesn't
Yes.
he, and sort of puts doubt in his soul.
So yeah, he's really good. He's quite a fast talker, so he's very good at talking people into things without them realising he's actually doing it.
Yeah. But yeah, the second season doesn't sort of appear until 1986.
And we should say that the first season is on ITV, and the second series is shown on Channel 4, despite being made by Thames.
Yeah. But you've got Lindsay Duncan turning up in that. Mm-hmm. It's a very weird title sequence. He's on the back of a... He's on roller skates on the back of a milk float or something. And she's sort of leering out the window. Well, not leering, looking out the window confused. Yeah.
Because the weird thing with that is that you've got the first episode, which is One Door Closes, which has got Derek Goodwin as producer-director. Then it feels like there's a sort of change behind scenes.
Yeah, because Anthony Parker takes over. Yeah, and it does feel different, and it is a bit too loose for me. That I can never sort of get my head around it. But I think those first 6 episodes are really quite good all the way through. It is helped by the cast, I think.
Yes.
Because you have got a load of good people sort of bouncing off each other, and I just like going back to it. It was quite fun. I would sort of recommend it as a piece. What's your sort of favourite moments?
I do like all the physical comedy elements because it's, he's remarkably good at them, Dennis Lawson. And I would have, before I watched it again, because I didn't really remember any of those bits, I would have never thought it of him. Yeah. Because he always, he's not a really serious actor. He's done some sort of big stuff, but I think he's one of those actors that just pops up in various different things. He's quite happy to take a job on if it'll,
Yeah. We should say series 1 is written by Andy Hamilton.
Yes.
And he was on the Sunday morning thing, wasn't he? Because he's written a book in longhand.
Yeah.
And we sent a tweet in, does Andy have any memories of working on the Kit Curran Radio Show? Yeah. But they either didn't send it to him or just ignored it, so it's a shame. We did make an effort to contact him because he doesn't like technology. He's not on anywhere. He's not on computers generally, is he? No. So he's quite hard. Series 2 is co-written with Andy and Guy Jenkins.
Yes. It's sort of pre Drop the Dead Donkey, and there are elements of this that they would carry over to Drop the Dead Donkey, because obviously in that you've got another Damien, who's a news reporter who is, much like Kit, is very unscrupulous and will sort of get his own way, where he sort of goes to disaster things and puts teddy bears there and that sort of thing.
We should also mention George, who's the caller at the start of
the first 6 episodes.
Sort of in the first scene, George is always calling in about something.
Yeah.
And I quite like that observation, because I think radio stations do sort of end up with a core of regular callers, some of whom are a bit odd, it has to be said. I have heard some very strange calls to local radio stations. Yeah, but all in all, I really enjoyed that.
Yes. The second series is definitely not as good as the first. So if you do buy the box set, just regard the second series as a bonus. Yeah. Really. But yeah, the first series is definitely worth watching. Anything with Brown Wild in is always sort of good value, I think.
But a thumbs up for the Kit Curran Radio Show, and as we said, available on DVD. Yes. So worth adding to your collection.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, we'll say thank you then, and see you again. Bye-bye.
Bye. Said viewing figures.
Eh?
Well, they would be worrying about their viewing figures because they're a radio station.
Oh, I meant listening figures.
Yes.
I'm a fool.
Unless there's somebody sitting outside watching who's going in and out.
Maybe. Yeah. Right. Next, a little brief thing from Martin about Dangerman.
Yes, indeed.
sitting in the car on a Sunday morning thinking about Dangerman. I've been watching Dangerman last few weeks now. And there's some ambiguity over sort of series 3, where it begins and where it ends, and because there was a set of 11 that were broadcast as series 3, but generally were filmed in a previous recording block. Anyway, I've arrived at the final recording block, and it's taken a turn for the dark. I mean, the 3 episodes I've watched, the first one is called a Man on the Beach, or The Man on the Beach. And, well, that basically involves our hero being hacked by a machete and left for dead, and that isn't really normal for a spy program in the 60s, or certainly an ITC one. However, of course, they're up against, at that time, Sean Connery as James Bond, and maybe they were trying to get a bit away from that and be a bit sort of darker and more real world, although then Callan is being made at the same time, and Callan is kind of giving you a whole different spin on sort of seedy and bleak when it comes to spy drama. Then you get the man who wouldn't talk, and it's basically halfway through. You've got John Drake has a contact who's helping him, and because this man who's been brainwashed or tortured, that thing that they do in the 60s with the light bulbs, it's a bit Ipcress-file really, although you look at the way they've shot it and you think, why didn't he just walk out the circle? But then again, because he's not chained or anything, but hey. Anyway, so halfway through, he gets all confused, this spy they're trying to get out of the country, and he murders John Drake's assistant, his contact, who's been quite a nice bloke all the way through. And then you get to this one I just watched this morning, which is Say It With Flowers. Again, a nice little man who obviously has no life apart from his sister, gets persuaded to go to Switzerland and get murdered, and his sister is his only sort of contact with his old life, and it's Ethel from EastEnders, but setting that aside. Anyway, he's just gone off to Switzerland, and his sister gets a bunch of flowers at the door and then gets horribly murdered. And again, it's so bleak, so dark. And I've enjoyed Dangerman. I'm about, 73, 74 episodes into the 86 episode run, so I'm getting towards the end of it. But God, it's gone to some dark places. And I don't know, putting it in context of spy dramas of the 60s, I've always not really wanted to watch Dangerman. Years ago, I enjoyed The Prisoner, and somebody I worked with, must be 20 years ago, and it gave me his file of old 6 of 1 stuff about Port Miriam and The Prisoner and everything. And it had lots of Dangerman stuff in it, because they were sort of Patrick McGoohan fans as well. And I looked through it, and there was a lot of Dangerman stuff, and I never really got around to it. I thought, it's a bit black and white, a bit slow. Since then, of course, I've watched things like The Saint and thought, actually, I'm enjoying this. And so I finally decided to take the plunge and have a look at Dangerman, and it's been fabulous. I really enjoyed it. But this dark turn it's suddenly made is it's just very odd. Still, there you go, Dangerman. Keep at it. I'm not far from the end now. It goes into colour briefly before turning into The Prisoner, and that's a whole different story. Ta-ta.
Thank you to Martin for those thoughts.
Thank you, Martin.
I don't really know Dangerman at all.
We've got it. It's been sat in the house for goodness knows
Warren
how long.
knows it better than me, but hey.
Yes. But it is apparently the same character.
Okay, really?
Yeah. John Drake is the prisoner.
Oh, we'll get letters.
I think it's just McGoohan's playing the same part, really.
Well, in some ways, this issue's sort of coming to an end already. It doesn't feel like we've done many links.
No.
But that's because we've left the big article till the end this time.
It's a whopper.
So thank you to everyone for listening, and don't forget to come back for episode 53.
Yes, which will feature a tribute to Diana Rigg.
Yes, of course.
We couldn't fit it on this one.
Yes.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
Armchair Thriller.
Hello again, Man the Archives people. It's me, Paul Chandler. I'm back here again with Nick. We promised you a part 2 of this article, and here we are to talk about Series 2 of Armchair Thriller.
And I've been in cold storage for 2 years to the 2-year gap.
It's not true. It's not true.
We finished the last article by talking about jobs for the boys, and Robert Banks Stewart script edited the first series. I think he had to leave Doctor Who to do it, because he was going to do what became the Talons of Weng Chiang, which was a foe from the future. And I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think he left. I read somewhere that he had to leave that to Robert Holmes because he had to start work on Armchair Thriller. So similarly, it's a small world, and Robert Holmes actually takes over from Robert Banks Stewart and assembles what became the 7 in total. I think it was 7 for Series 2.
But it's more complicated, isn't it?
It's very.
As far as the production companies involved.
We have a conundrum, listeners, and I don't know whether you might be able to shed some light on it, because I would love, again, sort of the anal side of it, I would love to read about the production of this season in particular, because it was affected, I believe, by the famous technician strike of 1979. But there are some things, the compensation of which doesn't really make a lot of sense, and I'll explain a bit later. But just to say, the title sequence, I haven't mentioned much about the title sequence. It's of Series 1, it's a sort of live-action figure in a chair sitting down, and then when the music goes at the end, the fingers go across over the side of the armchair arms, and as a grip. Now, in Series 2, I think this was slightly naff production decision, but they did an animated one, which wasn't half so scary, and a sort of slightly modified version of the music, and they made the figure in the chair wobble like he was in a Scooby-Doo cartoon at the end when the music goes at the end. Now, I don't like this. It spoils what was a bloody good title sequence, and it was just so unnecessary and made it so hokey at the very end when the series was just doing so well. So I bad production decision, I think.
I should probably add that the theme music was composed by Andy Mackay, who was a member of Roxy Music.
Yes.
Who were back in action again. They'd had a few years hiatus, hadn't they?
I heard a sort of whisper. There was another series which we watched more recently where Andy Mackay was we did the music. I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but it's an excellent theme music, and it sets the tone brilliantly. But why they had to fiddle with the titles, I do not know. The second series started a little earlier in the year, and I've got it here somewhere. There we go. At the 8th of January in 1980. Obviously, I was keen on seeing another series because I'd enjoyed the first one very much. I was now 11. And I suppose, maybe I was allowed to stay up a little bit later, but I think it was around about the same time. The first story is called The Victim. Now, do you remember anything about The Victim?
I don't remember a good deal about that one. It's a 6-parter.
Yes.
And it's one of the Thames ones, which the previous season had all been Thames.
Yes.
But no, I don't remember much about the plot.
No, it's a kidnap story basically. You got a girl kidnapped. You're played by Lorna Yabsley, who was seen to be very much the child actor of the time. She then went on to do a very good episode called The Flypaper of Tales of the Unexpected.
Yes, that is very good. I've seen that recently.
Yes, so really chilling. And Alfred Burt was, if you want, he does pervert very well indeed. Bless him. But anyway, I digress. But this is a 6-parter. It's an original script by, is it Michael Ash? Michael Ash, that's right. Directed by Gareth Davies. You've got at the helm, playing the kidnapped girl's father is the very excellent John Shrapnel, sadly, who died recently. A very good Shakespearean actor who was in Space 1999 with Brian Blessed, playing a sort of deranged spaceship captain in Death's Other Dominion. And he's just amazingly dramatic. And there's Gerald Sim in one of his rare serious parts. Alan Bennion, who Doctor Who fans will know as the Ice Lords in all the Ice Warriors stories, playing a wonderfully weary Yorkshire reporter who's kind of like very down to earth and seedy and Paul Jericho of Oh No, Not the Mind Probe fame, which doesn't quite hit the spot the same way as John Shrapnel does, but hey ho. And you've got Bernard Kay as the man behind it all. He's always great. Lots of location work in Yorkshire, including the denouement was filmed in a wonderfully derelict old sort of old factory. Now, the thing that 70s, and we're watching a load of professionals at the moment. We're from the box set that we bought last year, and it's made our lockdown chum, basically, the professionals and the goodies, the amount of derelict old, locations that they've got, like so much atmosphere, and I don't think you get that much wreckage these days. But they're terrific, and they make full use of it in this last. I have to say that it's a bit weird because there's this subplot involving this chap who is a very respectable chap who's got involved with these things, villainy, and it's he's their front man. He's got an attack of conscience, and there's Clive Dunn's wife, Priscilla Morgan, playing his kind of love interest, and it's just like you've switched off Armchair Thriller and turned over to Last of the Summer Wine. Because it's jarring at first, but then you realise how it weaves into the story, and it's quite clever. But it's like suddenly you've got these two comical characters in the midst of these psychopaths. It's just really interesting. But it's one of perhaps even though it's excellently produced, it's perhaps one of the lesser ones. It's extremely entertaining, but again, I think you just need that extra edge with a six-parter. You've got to keep going. But I mean, there's it does the job, and I don't think here we go again. But it's not quite as special, shall we say, as some of the others. I'd even forgotten the name until the DVD came out. But again, this was about 2008. That whole spurt of them came out. So,
The next story up is where question marks first raise their head, because it's called Dead Man's Kit. It's a four-parter directed by Colin Buxey, written by Tom Clenaghan, but it's one of the two Southern production ones. It's weird. It's weird having these two that are done by Southern, and it's weird that they're not like at the end or anything. This is like the second one. But there's very little known about it.
This is the conundrum I would love to know the answer to. It's like a puzzle that I've never been able to solve, because the technicians' industrial strike hit the ITV in the summer into the autumn of '79. Now, this, we are told, is the reason it was another story called Chelsea Murders was postponed because of the strike. They had problems with the strike. So, fair enough. Okay so far. So, to fill the gap, they brought in these two four-parters, which had been made by Southern. Now, what doesn't make any sense is that it was made by a totally different production company, Southern Television, but with the same team of the Armchair Thriller, Andrew Brown, who actually adapts the second Southern one, which is a bit later on. And Colin Buxley, of course, is Verity's husband. So, it's almost as if, it would be a massive coincidence, even if it was just happened to be two four-part dramas that they were making at the time and somewhere else, and they were drafted in. But they're actually, although it's sort of, halfway there and halfway not, because the production team's the same, but the whole presentation is completely different from, and it's all as with the second Southern one, it's actually all shot on film, on location.
Up there with the mysteries of the American episodes of Tales of the Unexpected.
Yes.
Not much explanation as to about what's going on with those.
I would love to know exactly what went wrong, and they got it, which meant you actually got 2 more stories than you did on the not broadcast, but you actually got two more stories to enjoy that season. But so you got the 2 4-parters that were drafted in to fill the gap. So, and how were they chosen? Like you say, by rights they should have been right at the end. So, and also if you look at, I don't know if this is any clue or they just made up the date, but on Dead Man's Kit, they're looking at someone's letter, and it's dated April 79. So I've always assumed that it was shot around that time. And again, the latest story, High Tide, somebody signs into a hotel April 79 a little bit later. So I think the 2 were shot back to back. I think they were both directed by Colin Buxley, which was long before the strike. So they just, why? And also, I'm jumping the gun a bit here, but when I eventually watched the Chelsea Murders, I was expecting something like Sharda, where huge chunks were missing, but literally only one or 2 continuity announcements, and all bar the first and last episode with music. And I thought, well, they could have finished this in time. The strike was over unless people really were that busy that all the actors have finished their work. So I'm totally baffled as to how they got into this problem in the first place, and why the stories were done at Southern. There's almost certainly a perfectly reasonable explanation, but I'm fascinated by that conundrum. Maybe I'll be disappointed when I find the answer. It'll probably be simple, but
no, I was going to say, what about the actual story of Dead Man's Kit? Is it a favourite or?
No, probably not. I don't dislike any armchair thriller, I must admit. I could happily sit down and watch any of them. If you were to come around and say, "Oh, let's stick on Dead Man's Kit," I'd be quite happy, because there's something good to say about every story. I don't think it's slightly spy, slightly naval action, but there's 2 things against it, I think. One of which is it's just too slow a burner, even for a 4-parter. And also, in terms of the lead actor, Larry Lamb doesn't quite have the clout that maybe certainly because we're rewatching series 2 at the moment, and you've got 6 episodes of John Shatnell absolutely lighting up the screen, and then you've got Larry Lamb playing this kind of simple sailor trying to sort of solve this mystery, and you think, he doesn't quite, but there's some wonderful moments. The cliffhanger to episode 3 is quite chilling, and it turns out to be a fairly satisfying spy story. Until the last episode, I have to say, Maurice Colburn is in it as the lead sort of nasty, and he's a bit wasted. And I don't mean he's drunk, but he's not utilised enough, really. I think they were trying to sort of keep him back towards the end because he was supposed to be on the run. But and there's that wonderfully weird actor Philip Locke with a funny eye that was in the Doctor Who story Four to Doomsday. He plays a sort of quirky naval intelligence man who delivers some very dry put downs, which is quite fun. Excellent small part for Clive Merrison as the ship's captain. He's really, and if you see him in Paradise Towers with the funny voice and everything, I was like, and but he really does, like as with Girl Who Walk Quickly, a great part for him, and which plays deadly straight. So yeah, not one of my favourites, but interesting again, some nice location work. Interesting to see around that, sort of something completely. It's a bit different. The whole texture feels different. Quite literally, of course, because it would be on film.
Well, we're back to Thames again for the third story of Series 2.
Yes.
Dying Day.
Yes.
Another four-parter, directed by Robert Tronson, who had done The Limbo Connection, and written by John Bowen.
Yes.
He's got some loony idea you're going to murder him, have him murdered.
Anthony Skipling?
Professionally, hitman, that kind of thing. Put out a contract, you know, one sees it on television. Chop, chop.
My name is Anthony Skipling.
Yes?
Anthony Skipling. I am a harmless little bugger. And I don't know that I know.
Have him killed? Mrs. M and I thought, simplest way, just tell him you've changed your mind. Have him killed. Professionally. Have him killed. Professionally.
You have a very distinctive voice. Memorable, immediately recognisable. I think you must know that.
I speak with some deliberation, yes, perhaps it is noticeable.
It is noticeable.
There is a reason. I have a malfunction of the vocal cords, which will in time, I'm told, kill me. However, it has so far proved possible, almost indefinitely, to delay that time. Mrs. M and I thought, no use telling him he's made a mistake. That would only make him worse. He's got a fixed idea, you see. The first step with these puggly-wallers is agree with everything they say and then tell them you've changed your mind. You're the Barasab, you change your mind whenever you like. They're perfectly susceptible to logic. Malum, Barasab gone change his mind. Take high, off you go, Johnny.
He's a foreigner.
We don't use the word.
Why is the sun shining outside your window?
Why should I have him murdered?
I don't know. Some secret. Something to do with my house?
Well, it is done. Murder, one hears of it. I do not believe that I have ever done it. If it were to be done on my behalf, I do not believe I should be told.
Oh, I'm afraid I can't accept that. I have proof. Well, I had proof. A recorded conversation to which you were a party. The tape fell into my hands and was later recovered.
What fell into his hands?
The tape.
It was to be done professionally on February the 28th. The date was in some way important. Well, I'm here to tell you, you'll not have me killed on February the 28th or any other day. I've tracked you down. I have your name and address. I shall leave a letter with the bank. The police will be obliged to pursue inquiries.
February the 28th?
If you wish to acquire my house, you must do it in the proper way through an estate agent. In any case, I do not wish to sell.
On February the 28th, I shall be in Inverness.
Wednesday, I'll be in Inverness.
And I have to say, this is the one I wanted to see the most because I did the unthinkable. I watched the first episode and was so freaked out by the cliffhanger, I actually did a bunk. I sort of tuned into little bits and pieces, but as also little bits and pieces when it was repeated. But I actually did a bunk and missed the rest of the story. And I spent then 28 years wondering what had happened, as you do.
What was the thing that freaked you out? What was the...
well, I don't want to say too much just in case the viewers want to watch it, but it's a scene on a train, and the cliffhanger episode, cliffhanger to end of episode 1, where you see a character earlier all mutilated and everything, and the way it's done. Robert Tronson is one of the best of the Armchair Thriller directors. He gets some splendid location work. Again, snow. You think, oh, when was it snowing? It was probably early 79 when it was shot. Ian McKellen is just knockout. He's brilliant in it, and it's my favourite. John Bowen again. That's wonderfully. It's even more. It's the most disconcerting of the lot because you've got this innocent man, kind of, and everything just spirals out of control. And it's beautifully macabre. And there's, again, as what makes macabre things work is little touches of realism, like the pub and there's something on a cassette, and it all builds and builds, and again, wonderfully made. So it ticks all the boxes, that one. And it's, of course, as a four-parter, it's just boom, 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 And I remember watching it all the way through for the first time with you. I think it was one of the weekends you came down. I think it was May 2008. I seem to always associate it with getting a new computer. But yeah, we sat and watched that all the way through, and I wasn't disappointed, I must admit. Quite tragic at the end. But and you've got Kate Coleridge, who's Sylvia's daughter, playing his sort of carer. Well, not carer, but sort of befriender. should I say, sort of Samaritan woman. And it's for me, it's Armchair Thriller at its very best. With splendid central actor. You've got Cyril Schapp as well, who's done many a Who. And who else is there? Again, this is McCluskey in her second Armchair Thriller. But do you remember anything of that?
No, I'm afraid I don't. I see that Prentice Hancock.
Oh yes,
in that.
He's
one,
in two actually. He's also a policeman in Dog's Ransom. So he gets a double dose of Bowen. Prentice is actually Scottish, and he gets to be Scottish in this with a beard and a very un-Prentice Hancock part. He and another man play interrogators who kind of everything, pretty well the whole story is done in flashback, which I completely forgotten about when I saw it. And yeah, it real boils up quite nicely. And of course it's an original script from Bowen. In actual fact, I kind of wish that books existed of the TV story, the TV only stories, because that would certainly be one. I don't know if it would have the same impact, but I'd certainly like to see an adaptation, like the same way as these are adapted from the books. It would be fun to see a book adapted from the TV ones, adapted back again.
Like a target.
Exactly, yeah. So, great.
The next story is also directed by Robert Tronson, and it's called Fear of God, another 4-parter, written by Troy Kennedy Martin. And I see it has our friend Michael Sheard in it.
Yeah, he certainly has. We've just finished watching that again, actually. It's one I get out quite regularly. I think it's probably amongst my favourites. Again, a 4-parter. You can see Robert Holmes is at the helm, because he really, when he was in Doctor Who, he kind of massively reduced the 6-parters because he felt they were a bit flabby. And so it's telling that I think you've only got three 6-parters, but although obviously only 2 of those were transmitted. But Fear of God, yeah, it's a nice, again, like Limbo Connection, it's a conspiracy thing from Derry Quinn. Now, I don't have the book present with me, but I have read it. And in my opinion, the TV version is vastly better. It tightens it up really nicely. It makes a much better character, the central character, Paul Marriott, played superbly by Brian Marshall.
Who I know from, he was on so many programmes that I like, but he was, and he also had connections with Australia.
Yes.
He was in things like Prisoner and Neighbours and Home and Away, as well as things like The Avengers and Need and Line and Professionals. And
he was a fantastic actor, and this is a wonderfully Brian Marshall part, because usually he plays heroic goodies or heroic baddies, and this is a guy, although he's a good guy, he's a bit of a shambolic kind of rather disorganised journalist. Who rather shambolic divorcee who lives in this ramshackled house and does the washing up by putting it in the bath, and sets up, can't be asked to sleep in the same bed. And Troy Kennedy Martin and Holmes, you can almost feel their humour coming out in the scripts, but in the book, the Marriott character ambles all around London and goes to these religious institutions to try and find out this Regiment of God, which is a sort of right-wing thing that this girl who supposedly falls to her death was part of, and he takes an awfully long time to sort of get round to everything, and you lose the whole impetus of the drama, which it stays in the spooky ramshackled house in the first episode, and he investigates around. Again, Robert Tronson does a super job on the atmosphere and the lighting and everything, and because you've got although Marriott's flat is on studio, the house is real, it's real location. You've also got Garrick Hagan, who's another Doctor Who figure as one of the bad guys. Peter Celia, who's always playing the posh ministry type in everything. Nice performance from a girl called Madeline Church, who plays the younger sister of the murdered girl, and it's a nice performance because it's not wimpy. but it's just got that edge of vulnerability. And Kennedy Martin and Holmes really kicked the denouement in the it kick it into shape, because in the book it's a car chase and it ambles along, and Marriott sleeps with one of the people that he's supposed to be investigating, and it's messy, and he does the actual way that they do it on telly is much wittier and much sharper and more exciting, and the murder girl's murderer comes face to face with them. There's a real exciting struggle at the end and a funny bit at the end, which could have fallen right flat, but they build up the tension so much it's almost a relief. And also Alan Armstrong, who plays a very curly-headed police, a special branch man. Again, the police can go in two directions. In this case, they're not very sympathetic in Dying Day, and they grow on you in this one, and they get involved in the action and get dirty, and it's a very, very satisfying little four-parter, and yes, a bit hokey, I suppose. I mean, somebody was saying some of this because it's all about sound weapons, and one of the reviewers said, "Oh, yeah, that effect's more like Doctor Who," and I thought, oh, is that such a bad thing? It's actually really well done. So there is room enough for more hokey, good versus evil-y kind of things, which is more this story rather than the more ambiguity and psychological drama of some of the others. But it's extremely watchable. And again, full marks to Troy Kennedy Martin and Holmes for sort of pulling together what's actually a rather rambly book. I'll probably buy it again at some point. I was kind of having a bit of a clear out, and I thought it's probably the only adaptation I've read the only original book I've read so far, which actually disappointed a bit. But very, very, very recommended.
The next story we've got is another one of the Southern ones.
Yes.
And it's called High Tide. It's a four-parter. It's directed by Colin Buxey again and written by Andrew Brown. And it's the one that I've probably seen most recently. Now, remind me, did I watch it with you as a four-parter?
Yes, recently, yeah, because I've only got the four-part version. I think they're Talking Pictures has shown it recently, because I think, if I remember rightly, Simply Media, who put out, because of course these, obviously the Thames DVD releases went out, and then there was a bit of a hiatus because it was a case of who's going to put out the Southern ones? So the Southern ones came along about a year later. Firstly Dead Man's Kitten, then High Tide, with the most appalling amateurish covers. I think the fan site on Armchair Thriller actually produced covers that matched with the Thames ones. Sort of fake covers that was more uniform, which I actually did. I did run off a copy of, so they do show a movie version in Talking Pictures, which own Simply Media, or Simply Media their own Talking Pictures, but I've got the original four-part version. So I remember showing it to you at our previous home, so like about 10, 11 years ago, but also more recently, because before lockdown, before COVID, you and I were going to take a trip to Plymouth, and I was going to sort of interest you in the idea of looking around some high tide locations, because it's all shot around the Plymouthy sort of it's actually set in a place called Yarmouth, which is sort of, you can almost, it's sort of a combination of all sorts of different places in and around the south coast. Ian McShane is the lead. He's very understated, very kind of moody, and again, the character kills somebody at the beginning, and so he doesn't immediately elicit your sympathy, even though it's not a very nice character, and there's a reason for it, as he runs over the dog. That's the scenario that's actually built. There's a picture of him in the TV Times, I remember, when High Tide went out, strangling Malcolm Terrace, who played the co-pilot in Horns and Nymont, and that's what sets the things in motion. Like Dead Man's Kit, it's a bit of a slow burner, but I think what makes why I prefer it to Dead Man's Kit is I suppose it builds the intrigue a little bit more. Ian McShane holds your attention a little bit more. He's a more engaging character than Larry Lamb's Chalky White, but it just has a bit of a sinister quality. And the end is very good as well. It's there's some very moody chase across the sand things. But it's interesting to see in both because from the book, the Verity Lambert book, it portrays Colin Buxley as a very man's man kind of laddish character, and this is, or you can almost feel this in his Armchair Thrillers, because you've got a naval ship with lots of lads, and the lead character is very Boise, and of course you've got Ian McShane, who's a very man's man kind of quite a heavy drinker in his time, I understand. And you can almost feel those kind of alpha male vibes from the sort of, and you the lead character goes boating, and but like Dead Man's Kit, it's nice to have something entirely on location.
I'm watching Ian McShane in Lovejoy at the moment, which I've had the box set for ages, and sort of tackling that at the moment.
I like him. I think he's a good actor.
Yeah, and also one of those actors who doesn't seem to get any older. And he's also one of those people who's had, a second or third career doing really high-profile things in America in the noughties and the nows.
Absolutely.
So just as you think, oh well, Lovejoy was very high profile in the 90s, but he went on to do something even more high profile.
Right. Oh goodness, he's a very prolific actor. The other person who's in it is Terence Rigsby, who was a few years later was Dr. Watson to Tom Baker's Sherlock Holmes, playing one of the ne'er-do-wells in High Tide, and he I have to say, there's a bit in part one. The direction from Buxley is very, very good and very atmospheric, but there is a technical cock-up in the first episode because everything's done on film. Quite low-grade film, actually. I'd love to see a spruced-up version of both those stories. But when Terence Rigsby has a scene, a one-to-one scene with Ian McShane in the garden of the hotel that they're staying at, and Terence Rigsby is actually wearing sunglasses, and when you do the reverses on Terence Rigsby, you can actually see the production crew with the filming him in his sunglasses. I'm not one of these people that criticises these things, because I think they're rather nice to see. It's quite a nice moment.
On a slight sideline, very briefly, I've been watching Dynasty in lockdown, and the amount of boom mics that wander into shot in season 3, you wouldn't, some shows that we like get reputations for being tacky or badly made, and you don't expect it from Dynasty.
Yes.
You expect it to be high budget. They wouldn't be, but actually I've seen more boom mics in season 3 of Dynasty than I've seen in any episode in the whole of Doctor Who from 1963 to 1989.
Maybe you and I can team up at some point and do Dynasty on RTA or Shetty.
Yes.
Because it was actually, even though I've never gone back to it, it was among my favourite programmes in the 80s. I've Dynasty on a Saturday night. Whoa. And that was great. I mean, yes, I was in it for the totty, but it was a fun show. I always enjoyed it, and it would bring back a lot of memories, I think, because I remember I watched it from the beginning to nearly the end. But anyway, I digress. Going back to High Tide, I actually tracked down a book. It's a little bit older than some of the other Armchair Thriller stories. It was written by P.M. Hubbard in 1970, and whereas Fear of God is probably the biggest departure from the book that you can imagine, High Tide is Andrew Brown, who created Armchair Thriller actually adapted it, so it is actually very, very faithful to. I'm not sure if it's ever recorded what P.M. Hubbard thought of the adaptation, because I think he was still around at that point. But even the wholesale chunks of the dialogue are taken from the book, and certainly the events happen. And of course, the whole thing is done. Unlike Dead Man's Kit, maybe that's why I find High Tide a little bit more engaging. Is everything's done in a monologue, and you see Ian McShane narrates it in his thoughts all the way through, and that is very much in keeping with the book. And again, there's whole phrases and things like that. I don't know if that makes it lazy or faithful, depending on your point of view. But I like High Tide. Yes, it's got. Although not among the finest, it's still good.
Well, we're on to the penultimate story now, the Cersei Complex, 6 episodes, directed by Robert D. Cardona and written by David Hopkins.
Yes.
Not one I remember.
No, it's a bit of an odd one, this one. It's complex being the right word, actually. It holds 6 episodes because it keeps going. It's got twists and twists, and it's a nice piece, actually. I really like it. It boasts a very good central performance, an excellent central performance from Alan David, who, again, with referencing Doctor Who all the time, I'm afraid, but he played the Undertaker in The Unquiet Dead with Christopher Eccleston. He plays a psychiatrist in this. In the best traditions of Armchair Thriller, he actually does some quite reprehensible things in the course of the story, but the character has such a sense of humour and such a sort of twinkle in his eye about him that you never quite hate him. You hope he's going to get what's coming to him, but at the same time you can't help liking him. So it's a very clever character. There's the lead character who is effectively plays the role of the Cersei in it, i.e. this female temptress who turns people to swine in Greek mythology. Is played by Beth Morris, who again sadly died quite recently, who was the lead villainess in the Blake 7 episode Mission to Destiny. She was the murderer in it, and she was in Crucible of Terror as well. And again, she has a succession of these men in it, and she plays all sorts of games with them throughout. The other person who's in it is a guy called Michael Deeks, who played Swiftnick in Dick Turpin. He was very much an actor at the time, and the book. It's adapted from the book, and one can imagine that they felt. I think it was published in '75, so that's sort of 3 or 4 years before the adaptation. But the book. I mean, full marks to. Was it who is it that adapted it again? Sorry, I'm just reaching for David Hopkins. He did a great job because the book. The book is very, very good, but it's a difficult one to put into sequence because it's all done in diary entries, sort of like essays from each character. So one could almost imagine him cutting it up and sticking it on a piece of paper and just trying to decide which bits go where. I have to say, it's fairly faithful to the book. And the book, I think, probably deserves a second read at some point because it's very, there's a lot. There's very layered, which justifies its 6 episodes. I think it's slightly more successful 6-parter than perhaps The Victim, and it's got more to offer. And you've also got stage doctor Trevor Martin in it as her first husband in this. And yeah, it keeps you going, and it twists round and round and round, and has a nice twist at the end. So, and of course, this was how the original series ended on this one, because the story. I don't know if it was supposed to come after Cersei Complex or before, but which is the next one. But no, I'd love to show you Cersei Complex again at some point.
Yeah. So that final story is the one that I have I have the most associations with, or it should be the other way around. It has the most, anyway. It's called The Chelsea Murders.
A masked killer claims yet another victim in Chelsea. 6 apparently motiveless murders. But the police are narrowing their circle of suspects.
It's the timing, Summers. The timing. It's all too neat.
Makes you start to wonder if we should be looking elsewhere.
No. I've got a feeling. I know it's one of those 4.
Frank Colbert Greer, art lecturer. Local reporter, Mary Mooney.
Get this feeling that something...
Steve Gifford and Artie Johnson.
To all of us.
Well, don't you see? We haven't just got a barmaid here. We've got an artist model, murdered in Chelsea. Isn't that great?
Mr. Walton, look what's come. Posted last night.
She had 3 lilies in her hand, and the stars in her hair was 7.
It's from a pre-Raphaelite poem, sir, called The Blessed Damozel. I had to learn it once at school. The Blessed Damozel looked out from the gold bar of heaven. Her eyes were deeper than the depth of water, stilled at even. She had 3 lilies in her hand, and the stars in her hair were 7. Have you gone raving mad, Mason? Well, don't you see, sir? It fits. Gold bar, Gold Key pub. Water stilled at even, drowned in the river at night. It fits, sir, and it connects.
Mason, I've got a horrible feeling you're going to tell me something.
Oh, sorry, sir. The poem is by Rossetti. Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Our murder victim was Diane Germaine Roberts. DGR, sir. DGR.
It was supposed to be a 6-part story, but it was never screened as a 6-part story. But it was actually screened, wasn't it, as a feature film
yes,
in 81.
Here we have the next conundrum, because I first became aware of the Chelsea Murders existing when the paperback version of it with one of those masks. It's about a serial killer who wears a particular mask, and there was a picture of it on this book in Paperback Parade, our mutually favourite bookshop ever, and it said now an Armchair Thriller, and this would have been about 1980 or 81, and I thought, hey. At that point, I think Cersei had gone out, and I thought with the exception of even though I'd sort of opted out of most of Dying Day, I was aware that it was on. I was aware that the next story, when the next story was on, and of course I didn't miss anything else. And so I thought, how did I miss this? Was it a different region, or So for a long time I thought. Right. So what went wrong? And of course, when the sites came out, the websites came out prior to the DVD releases, it explained about Chelsea Murders. It was done as an Armchair Thriller, but never made it because of the industrial strike. And I saw some photographs of it, and of course they put out the DVD as the original 6-parter, which didn't have. I think the only music that had was from parts 1 and 6, and the announcer is only on parts 1 and 6. Now, so you've got a movie version that was cut together and shown in the Christmas of 81. Now, in those days, I used to read the TV Times from cover to cover, and I would have been aware of the title by then. So. How on earth did this... I don't really understand how Chelsea Murders slipped my notice, because if I had known it, I thought, oh, that's Chelsea Murders, Armchair Thriller, I'd like to watch that. And for some reason, maybe it wasn't in our region or something, but it's completely slipped me by that it was ever shown. So
it was made by Thames.
Yeah.
Directed by Derek Bennett. Written by Jonathan Hales. I own the book as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm a fan of horror films, but a fan of slasher movies, and it falls into some of those sort of areas.
It does.
And 1981 was a big year for slasher movies. Always sort of known to be sort of a very famous year for that genre. So it fits in. So, but it's one of those ones that you showed me, and I instantly sort of clicked with, and ended up buying my own. It's the only one that, at the moment, that I own. And the funny thing is, I have another friend who. That's the one that clicked with him as well, but probably because we like we do like horror movies that it has that sort of extra reach. But yeah,
I mean, with so it was lovely to see it at last, and with the six, I'm glad they retained the six-parter as well. Heaven only knows why the music's only on episode 1 and 6. Well, I mean, who kind of thinks, I'm doing the music for this show. Oh, there's an industrial strike. Right. Oh, I suppose I better fast forward to the last episode and do the music for that, just in case. If all the music existed, why didn't you just slap it on? Or if they just got the continuity man back, just for a sort of 15-minute job, just reading it out. There is nothing. Anything like the complexity of the problems. The same strike affected. I don't think it was an industrial. It wasn't exactly the same strike that affected Sharda, but it was certainly it was rife with strikes at the time. But the wholesale chunks of Sharda weren't shot, whereas this, it could easily have been finished in post production. I really don't know quite why they didn't do it.
Remind me what music's on the movie version.
I don't know. So it's quite a long time since I've seen the movie version.
Yeah, but
I presume. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, I mean.
I mean, if they finished it for a movie version, then surely they had some music on it. But I don't remember. I don't know how many times. I tend to watch the episodic version just because the cliffhangers.
Yeah, I like cliffhangers. I must admit, my loyalty to the series as a format. So I always feel that that's the format it should have gone out in anyway. And also a whole chunk. There's a great chunks of it missing, of the narrative missing.
Because the DVD does contain both versions, doesn't it? The DVD contains both.
Oh yeah, fortunately so. Yeah, I mean, there's an outrageous character called Frank in it who. This whole there's a marvellous performance from David Gant, and it just a lot of that's missing in the movie version. I mean, if you would come around and say, well, let's watch the movie version, I'd do it like, I'd stick it in like a shot. I'd be happy to. I'm happy to watch any of them.
I like the fact that it's set in early 80s London as well. You see lots of sort of. It's very. Just an interesting historical document as well.
It is, and it's about. I mean, it's quite interesting. From, by 2008, I was about to make my last movie, my last film, when the DVD came out. But in by 1980, when it was, I would love to have made a film, and of course I went on to make films. But it's about a group that are really. Kind of having to, because film was very, very expensive in those days, having really to bump up the cash from anywhere they could to finish the movie, and it's so weird. And you've got a very cool, almost Huggy Berry black guy in it who. You think in normal terms, he wouldn't be seen dead doing what you see of the film. Which is it's a shame, actually. I've always thought it's a shame you never see more of the film, the rest of the film, or more, you see more of them being prepared. It's an interesting concept.
It keeps you guessing as well.
Going back to the police,
it keeps you guessing as to who the killer is.
Yes, because they give you several suspects. There's a lovely world-weary performance from Dave King as the main inspector guy. I mean, just when you thought you were fed up with sort of well-weary inspectors, he's just wonderfully put down faces. You've got who else have you got? I say David Gant as the sort of drug-pushing sort of gay member of the group. A guy called Michael Feast, who turns up in the James Nesbitt series Murphy's Law as his boss. And it's good, entertaining stuff. I don't think it quite. I mean, it's good stuff, but I don't quite think it quite fits into the Armchair Thriller because it's almost like it almost feels lifted from a sort of cop show. But I mean, it's got a lovely theatrical feel to it. I think for me, of the regular characters, the lead characters, the weak link for me is the female journalist. Compared to Brian Marshall, who just picks you up and kind of shakes you he's got such an energy to his performance. She doesn't come across as particularly likeable, or although it is quite funny. She has a romance, doesn't she, with the Swedish guy who played by an actor called Douglas Sheldon, who is probably known to Doctor Who fans as causing Katarina's demise in Dalek Invasion of Earth, and she sort of thinks they're going to get together, and I think of you as a sister. They kind of and she gets all stroppy and narky and kind of. But no, it's a great. I don't mind how many times we watch it because it's good fun story. And I don't actually currently have a copy of the book, but I have read it, and I would say yes, very faithful. And again, it was published in '78, so it was fairly hot off the press from Lionel. What's his name? Who wrote the original?
Don't have
Lionel Davison. That's right, Lionel Davison. Yes, and a very faithful adaptation from Jonathan Hales. So yes, therein's a super series. I'm always a bit philosophical about really good shows that don't come back. I do wonder, if they had come back, whether you would have had diminishing returns, script editors who weren't as hot as some of the others. And you just wonder if the team gets farmed out, whether you get diminishing returns. We will never know, but it's a beautiful series, and it's just, if you like thrillers like I do, and if you like things that are just slightly macabre, like, as I say, like Tales of the Unexpected, I really would recommend it.
I have a little fact about the Chelsea Murders, the book. The original title, the American title, is Murder Games, and it won the Gold Dagger Award in 1978. So,
oh, good!
So,
yay!
Looks like it is one that it does look like it is one that was meant to be set in Chelsea in London. It wasn't renamed, or wasn't Chelsea in New York or anything.
No. It's definitely yes. It wasn't. There wasn't the same readaptation that Dog's Ransom had. It was definitely the real McCoy. It was always going to be set in London. So, but yes, again, so even some of the dialogue at the end is identical to that. Oh, and a special two mentions of two young actors at the time. David Yip, who was later beyond the Chinese Detective and A View to a Kill, plays a dodgy jean salesman. Nice little performance there. He doesn't get a great deal to do, and the other one is, let's see if I can't remember, is it Daryl or somebody? He plays the Arab character, the young Arab lad. He was in the Blake 7 episode Horizon as the lead character in that. I've often wondered why he didn't go on to do things. Sadly, he hung himself in 1981. So sad, tragic, more so when you think he probably didn't live to see Chelsea Murders actually televised, which of course that was televised in 81. So right at the end of 81. So very sad, because he was a good little actor. So Yeah, and a very early video recorder as well. It's in it. It's interesting with the old finger buttons and.
Well, Nick, I think we've run out of time, and thank you, listeners, for joining us again for. It sounds like we've got our own podcast.
Apologies to Troby and the Chelsea Pods. Apologies to Troby and Lisa for dawdling on this one for so long. I kind of wanted to do it so badly, but I wanted the circumstances to be right. I definitely wanted someone to talk to about it, which I have done. And because I just feel articles are done much better if you've got someone to bounce off. But thank you.
Well, thank you for choosing me as your present. Even though I don't remember as much as you do. I certainly.
Well, only because I saw it originally. I mean, and I watch it quite regularly.
Yeah. Okie dokie, listeners. We'll be back again soon, and thank you very much, Nick, and we'll hand you back to Andrew and Lisa.
Thank you.
That was episode 52 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Martin Holmes, Nick Goodman and Paul Chandler.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The scripts for the Kit Curran Radio Show were by Andy Hamilton.
And the producer was Derek Goodwin.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
Armchair Thriller.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
Armchair Thriller.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
You
can't do it now. You say it then.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
Armchair Thriller.
Bye.
Dreadful. Do it one more. Do it one more.
I don't know what you wanted me to say.
So here, do that.
So here's Paul and Nick looking at
Armchair Thriller.
But it was nice and warm inside with super safe carpet glazing.